Hi, I'm Shawn,
I'm Rhonda.
and we're looking forward to talking with you today about being a good listener.
That's important because if nobody's listening, why would we even speak? To have good communication, we have to have one of each.
Yeah, somebody has to be listening, and we want to do a good job of that. We want to find out, what does it look like? What are the rules for being a good listener? There's actually
Yeah.
rules involved for most things in life.
Yes. So we're going to talk about those. I think one of the biggest things that we'll get into is taking turns.
Yeah,
Because you know what? When the speaker initiates an issue, guess what? It's going to stir up in the listener your own issue.
yeah.
But we can't all talk about our issue at the same time. So just like we would say to a group of children, take turns.
You know
It's
what?
polite.
Yeah, one of the things that just first comes to my mind about being a good listener is the fact that if we're going to be able to speak, we have to first be able to hear, and you understand
Yeah.
that from obviously someone that is mute, that is not able to speak.
Right.
They also cannot hear.
Right.
So we have to be able to hear, to in turn also be able to effectively communicate.
Yeah. And so the focus is you're in the role of listener. That means your spouse has probably let you know they have something important that they want to say to you. So, how does this need to flow from your perspective?
You know, we need to be able to restate what the speaker is communicating to us. And again,
Yeah.
we've used this analogy before. It's like playing catch. The speaker throws the ball, the listener catches it. So how do I convey when we're communicating
Yeah.
that I caught your message?
Right. And so if you just say back, so what I understand you to be saying is, well, it sounds like this is what you're saying to me. Can you tell me if I'm missing the point? But I think you're saying, and so we have to use a lot of self control because as the listener, taking turns and being a good listener, we cannot put forward our own
It
agenda.
means we have to sit on the issue as a listener. I have to sit on my own issue, and I have to focus intently on this is what you're
Right.
feeling, your experience is, and conveying to you that I am connecting and hearing and understanding what message you're trying to give to me.
It could be a good thing to have notebooks in place when you're talking through an issue because there may be thoughts you have that you need to talk about. And we get concerned, don't we, that I'm going to forget what I had to say. We might want to jot a brief note. And speaker, we should be okay with that as long as the listener isn't writing the entire time.
Yeah. It just came to my mind, the first message really that God is conveying to Israel in Deuteronomy. He's saying the first commandment, hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one God. The first thing he's saying. He says,
Right.
I want you to hear. Think of how many times in the
Yeah.
Bible it says, he that has an ear to hear, let him hear. It's very important that we adopt the mentality of reception,
Yeah.
that I am able to hear something
Yes.
that someone that is important to them that they want to convey to
Yeah.
me.
Because he even says to be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to
Wow.
anger. So that shows all the self control
I
that
like
should be
that.
going on with us. So we don't want to flip roles. That's just not fair, is it? As the listener to say, you know what, I think I'm going to be the speaker now. You just step aside and you be the listener. What?
Yeah.
If the other person initiated this conversation, it's fair to really hear them out.
Many times what that looks like is one person brings up an issue, the other one says, well, that reminds me of, or you do this,
Yeah.
and they just flip it around and nobody walks away feeling heard.
No. And the thing is, listener, it's not about you at this moment. You may think, well, if you knew this, you wouldn't think that way. Or, well, something you did caused me to do what you're talking about. No, that right now you need to hear that regardless of what the person understands, regardless of the provocation, your action was not okay.
Yeah.
And that's important for you to hear. It's important for you to know the experience of the speaker when this or that action or inaction or words happened. and to be able to look in that heart and let your spouse show you around in
You
there.
know, if something comes to your mind, obviously it probably will when the speaker is presenting their issue, maybe make a note on your phone where
Yeah.
you could remember to come back and bring that up at a later time.
Yeah.
But when the speaker is presenting their issue is not the time for that.
There should be a focus on the other person's heart.
Yeah.
Your spouse has opened the door to their heart and has invited you to come inside so they can show you around, so you can sit down and see what it feels like inside to be your spouse. And that is something you should honor, not tromp around like the bull in the china shop.
And not become defensive, because this is not, excuse me, this is not the speaker putting you on the witness stand, you know, to give a defense of yourself. You know, you did this, and now defend yourself. You know, it's not about that. It's about the speaker saying, "Hey, this is how I felt when such and such happened."
Now, if you feel blamed and accused, it may be that your speaker is using you statements, that your speaker might need to make some adjustments, might have something to learn, and you could make a quick statement like, "Could you try saying that again in a way that doesn't feel blaming?" Try to see it, though, from the speaker's perspective. They're probably revealing their own heart. And yes, it may be about you. Guess what? You're in relationship with them after all.
Right.
It's probably going to be about you, because as we grow, we have to be able to hear these things.
And so just keep the focus on, this is my spouse revealing themselves, uncovering themselves, so you can see them.
What do I really need to hear right now? Because defensiveness makes the listener deaf. You cannot be a good listener if you are defending yourself, because then you only see and hear you, and you see and hear you so loudly, you cannot see and hear anyone else. And there's got to be a place in our hearts to be able to hear something outside of ourselves.
I did that so well for many years, being defensive, that is. And so you want to learn how to make connecting statements with your spouse. It's so important to be able to connect with the speaker and be able to say, wow, is that what it felt like to be you?
Right. Or, you know, I can really understand that you would feel that way. Note that we do not have to agree or be saying that if this happened to me, that's how I would feel. We're acknowledging the validity of the other person to have their very own thoughts and feelings, and that you should be okay with that. And so it doesn't have to make sense. As a matter of fact, when you put a male and female together, it probably won't make sense.
Right.
And so those things that are delicate to the female heart, or the things that are respectful or disrespectful to the male heart, or all the things that are involved in male-female, probably isn't going to make sense to you.
Right. And just to be able to say, wow, that looks like that was a very painful or very uncomfortable situation for you to be in, or to feel that way. That must have really hurt.
Can you imagine talking to a 5-year-old who's afraid of the dark and saying something along the lines of, well, that's dumb. There's nothing to be afraid of. But we do that to our spouse if we invalidate what they just shared. Wouldn't it be better to say to a 5-year-old, for example, wow, I'm so sorry that you're afraid. Let's turn the light on, look around, talk to them about it. Help them overcome the fear. Or anybody else that you would talk to. Do we shame them because they don't think like me? Or can we accept somebody who isn't me?
You know, many times I thought about David in the Psalms, and how many times that he was pouring out his heart to God, and just saying about how difficult his experience was in different cases. And then, you get the idea, God's just hearing him pour out his heart.
Yeah.
And, it doesn't necessarily mean that God saw his experience the same way that he did, but God was able to hear what he was praying.
Right. But so many times as the listener, we hear what the speaker is saying as an assessment of ourselves. Well, I just don't measure up. Well, I'm just not good enough. What do we do in our walk with the Lord? And you probably heard us say this before. The Lord shows us something to grow into, And then guess what? We grow into it, and what does he do? He shows us more to grow into. He reveals more of himself. Do we say, well, goodness, I just moved into the last thing God showed me, and here he is showing me something else.
Yeah.
He's never satisfied. I'll just never be good enough. Or do we say that's part of a journey?
Because we have room to grow. And in
Yes.
a relationship, we're going to be constantly growing, and we never really
Yeah.
fully arrive at the height of what we have
Right.
available to us to experience as a couple.
And we should look at that as a couple and expect to always grow, and to not look at, well, you're always finding fault. No. We're pointing out ways we can grow. And if we only care about how we can grow from my perspective, this would make me feel closer, but I'm never investigating how we can grow from your perspective.
Yeah.
What does my spouse bring to the table?
Yeah.
What can I do
Yeah.
to change? That's actually positive
It
to be
is.
able to change.
And really not being defensive is really, a lot of that is wrapped up in realizing what your spouse is presenting. They're not making an assessment of you, of who you
Right.
are. They're making a revelation of who they are.
Right. And like we said a while ago, defensiveness closes our ears faster than almost anything, and it shuts down communication. It should be a no-no in the marriage communication to get defensive.
And that's really, becoming defensive is really just saying, I see me, I see myself, and I'm not seeing you and what you're presenting.
This is where we get practice in being a stronger person. We get the ability to hear things that are not always easy to hear. And that's a mature thing for a person to be able to do. To be able to say, you know what, this is my truth, but this may not be your experience of what happened. You know, I'm not going to demand and dictate to you, you have to be just like me or you're not okay.
Yeah.
But we have to be able to hear something outside of ourselves.
And that brings us into not being dismissive of our spouse's experience that they're sharing with us.
Right.
And so we need to realize it's okay for my spouse to have a different perspective about this event than I do, and be accepting that it's God made both of us to be different, and we don't have the same viewpoint, and that's really our strength. Is
Yeah.
that we do have different perspectives, and finding that common ground together with the different perspectives.
You know, if we dismiss other people, we shush them. We basically tell them, what you think and feel doesn't matter in this relationship. Only what I think and feel matters. Well, that's not we. That's not two being one. That's one at the expense of the other. And everything is revolving around one and only one.
And this is so valuable, because many times we have the concept that two being one means we only have one perspective now. We only see things one way. How is it that two can become one and then maybe still have two different viewpoints about something?
Right.
It's because I'm able to value that the way I see things is not the only viewpoint that's out there.
That may be what the way the world would do it, is to say one at the exclusion of the other, because the world doesn't know the miracle of two being one. But God's miracle of one is he is completely he and she is completely she, and yet they are one.
It's me having the perspective I have, seriously or prayerfully considering a different vantage point, a different way of looking at or dealing with something.
Have you ever talked with anybody that maybe didn't know some things that you know, or they didn't accept some same beliefs or political perspectives that you did, and instead of offending them and walking all over them as a person, have you ever just said something like, well, thank you for sharing that with me, or wow, interesting to know. Have you ever talked to a teenager or a young adult, that time in life where they're smarter than they'll ever be? And have you ever looked at them and just said, wow, that's so interesting, and just withheld from saying some things? Because, like we said earlier, Jesus said, I have some things to say to you, but you can't handle them now. So he didn't say it. sometimes that's a positive thing.
You know, and being able to relate that someone else walking a mile in someone else's shoes, sometimes we use that phrase as to one of understanding that not everybody has the same experience in life,
Right.
and that you can have feelings about something
Yeah.
that I have no idea of what it was like to be you
Yeah.
growing up or even right now.
It completes us to be able to see a more full perspective.
So some problems that are encountered as a listener, sometimes you can become frustrated.
Sometimes you might notice the speaker's frustrated. So either one, if you're frustrated, why are you frustrated? Do you not feel heard? Are you the speaker or the listener?
Yeah.
If you don't feel heard, always go back to the rules. Am I the speaker or the listener?
What's the role I'm in?
If I'm listener, am I supposed to be heard right now?
Am I doing a good job of listening?
Yeah.
That would be a very revealing question to ask. If the speaker is presenting to you, you're supposed to be the listener. Am I doing a good job as a listener? Do you feel heard?
But also, if we're feeling frustrated as the listener, if the speaker does step on the triggers and we just can't seem to get around that trigger in the moment, it is okay to call attention and say, you know what, your tone has a little bit of a negative feeling. We don't have to go on and on, right? We don't have to say, you feel so belittling to me right now. You're this and no. We can be brief. That your tone has a little bit of a negative feel. Would you mind adjusting and trying that again? We can give the speaker another opportunity at speaking.
Asking questions about what's going on and not just making an assessment. This
Yeah.
is what's going on because I
Exactly.
see this. I already know that this is what's happening. So
Right.
having a curiosity and investigating is very important.
If we see that the speaker is repeating themselves or feeling frustrated, the speaker probably doesn't feel heard. Ask yourself, did you restate to make sure that you understood correctly?
Right.
Did you connect? Did you make a connecting statement with what the speaker said? If you don't agree and you're being asked to make a change, you can always say, it's really important to me that you shared your heart. Let me pray about that, and I'll get back with you about it.
Right. You want to ask the speaker, you want to restate basically what they have communicated to you.
Right. You want to stay on topic. So make sure, because that's one of the problems, is the listener can sometimes divert the topic. And if the speaker says, well, that's not what I said, it's not okay to say, well, no, you said. How many times have we been in a conversation, somebody misunderstood us, and we're like, well, no, that's not what I said. Oh, yeah, this is what you said.
Because
you
you're-
said da-da-da-da-da. And it's like, that is not what I meant. But have you ever heard somebody, they insisted, oh, that's what you meant, all right. And it's like, yeah, because you can read minds and you know what my heart message was, right? You're the listener, so you're the authority on that.
And we can find ourselves adding our own interpretation to the speaker's message
Yeah.
instead of letting the speaker give the clarification of here's
Right.
what I meant.
So listener, you don't know what the speaker meant more than the speaker does. The speaker knows what the speaker intended to say. The impact, what the message sounded like by the time it got into your heart, may not have been the intent. It is fair to allow the speaker to correct, no, this is what I intended to say. This was my intended message. And not judge the speaker based on the impact, the way I interpreted. That would be like to say, if we're speaking in Spanish and English, and I interpret that Spanish, and I'm like, this is what you said. And they're like, no, that's not what that means in English.
You have to be able to add the clarification that this is the intended message.
Right. Otherwise, I would have to look at the Spanish-speaking person and say, I, who hardly know any Spanish at all, I know what you meant. And it's like, really? Part of being a good listener is letting the speaker be the speaker and getting that intended message and get pushing aside my misunderstandings, my misinterpretations.
You know, sometimes as the listener, you may not know exactly how to respond. And
Yeah.
so asking a question of the speaker and say, hey, what do you need to hear from me right now? I've used that question many times with Rhonda. When I don't know how to respond, I don't know what to say, or maybe I'm concerned I'm going to say it wrong. And I'll just come out and ask her, you know, what is it that you need to hear? And she can let me know the message that she needs to hear from me right now.
Right, and so that's the best way to connect with the speaker when you feel like there's not a good connection. And it's always good, listener, to ask the speaker, did you feel heard? Did you feel like I caught your message? Did you feel that the issue you brought up was resolved in a way that you feel good about?
Or that I conveyed that it was important to me what you presented.
And then it's always good to evaluate after. How could we have communicated better? How could we have connected better? How can I hear?
Or how could I present better? We have to be able to be open to hear what our spouse's experience about what we're presenting, how we're hearing is.
Right. And if we never talk about how we talk, if we never look back over our communications and say, how did that go? How did it go for you? How were you feeling during that?
You know, it's not critiquing our spouse as much as being open to being able to say, hey, I probably have some room for improvement. I could do a better job.
And that's creating a safe environment where you're able to bring these things up and you let your spouse know, I want to hear those things. And we want to share them politely, kindly, delicately, gently.
We want to encourage you to be a good listener and to focus on what those rules are for being a good listener.
Also, we want to invite you to check out the other videos on our YouTube channel.